Wonderful. Okay, we'll let some folks into the meeting. Admit everyone. Hello, friends. Great to see you during this wonderful fall holiday season. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. I'm Ethan Janney. We'll introduce the program in a moment here and our guest for today. I will take the opportunity to spotlight myself on Zoom here, as well as our guest, Robyn. If you're out there on Facebook or YouTube, welcome. We will put a link in the chat for those channels that you can join us on Zoom and participate in this conversation here. Beyond that, I'll give a short intro to the program here so you know where you're at. And we'd love to have you in the Zoom call, or if you're still out on the socials, we'll try to engage with you. If you join the Zoom call, that's great. If you write a comment, we'll see it directly. You might even have a chance to participate in the conversation if you so desire. So what is this? This is Piano Tech Radio Hour. And what we do here is we meet every Saturday for years and years and years to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world, including manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, other piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to Radio Hour for just $16 a month and get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as all the archival recordings of over 200 episodes in a member area. You can join using the link bit.ly/joinptrh. Make sure to check out the podcast version of this program, audio only, at pianotechradio.com. Great for listening in the workshop, traveling, working out, all that good stuff, doing dishes. Also, check out the Substack blog where we share our insider content from the member area. And check us out on socials, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and the like. Let's introduce our guest for today. This is Robyn Sullivan, a master luthier who bridges the worlds of music and craftsmanship, starting as a violinist with a degree from Skidmore College. Robyn discovered their passion for violin making through an apprenticeship with Geoffrey Ovington, refined their skills at Chicago School of Violin Making, and has since worked at top violin shops in Chicago and Milwaukee. As a violinist with the Evanston Symphony Orchestra, Robyn has brought a performer's insight to the craft, creating and restoring instruments that truly connect musicians. Beyond that work, Robyn is a dedicated family person and athlete, active member of Quaker community, blending music, craftsmanship, and life in a enriching and a rewarding career. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour.
Thanks, Ethan.
Did I get all that right?
Mostly, I switched to viola, so I'm more of a violist these days instead of a violinist. When I was applying for colleges, I decided to go out for extra competitions to pad the college resume, as one does, and I was required to play the Bruch Concerto, which is just super high up on the E string. And after that, I decided, no, let's go hang out with the violists. They're a little bit more chill, and it doesn't hurt my ears to practice viola.
Okay.
But yeah, most of that's right. I fell in love with the violin at the age of 5 because I went to a family member's house, and one of the kids there was playing. And then for the next 2 years, I asked my mom for violin lessons. And for my 7th birthday, she gave me the choice. I could either go and get my ears pierced, which was something I'd been asking for as well, or I could get violin lessons. But I chose violin lessons. So started playing when I was 7, played through high school, college, and then, with the Evanston Symphony. But I moved to Maryland about 3 years ago, and to work full time at Potter Violins, which is where I'm speaking to you from right now.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I do bench work full time. I just don't have the time to play as much as I would like to, but I'm going to try to fit that in. Like the most I play right now is my son, who's 12. He plays cello, and occasionally we'll play duets together. I found some simple cello and viola duets that we could play for our family over the holidays, because that's always a hit. If you can play, Jingle Bells for the grandparents, they always love that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Wonderful.
but yeah, it was in college when I did an apprenticeship with Geoffrey Ovington. He was near Skidmore College and had connections to the school, because he had the most idealistic setup. He was in an old farmhouse, and he and his wife had converted the 140 acres of farmland into a nature preserve. His workshop was on the top floor of the barn, and it overlooked the Battenkill River, and the Mount Equinox in Vermont was just outside the window. You just looked over, and there it was. It was beautiful. And I made my first violin with him. And then I went to work at Fred Oster's in Philadelphia as an admin assistant, thinking I could get another apprenticeship if I was just, around more violin makers. But the more people I talked to, the more of them said, if you're serious, you should go to school. So I was told by one of the big formative women in the modern violin making world, Marilyn Wallen. I spoke with her, and she said, if you're serious, you should go to either Newark, England, or Chicago. So I didn't want to get a passport and figure out that kind of traveling. So I moved to Chicago in 2006. And attended the Chicago School of Violin Making. And I still have some connections there. I was on the board as a secretary for a while after I left. And I will say that if people are interested in violin making, I highly recommend the Chicago School of Violin Making. Within the past few years, the teachers have changed, and right now we have some gold medal award-winning teachers with Antoine Nedelik and Jeff Phillips, and the work coming out of the school is just getting better and better. And it's a trade school, so it's way more affordable than undergrad or graduate school, but it is a full-time 3-year program.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's changed a little bit, but when I was there, the requirements were you had to make 7 instruments, at least 3 or 4 violins, 1 viola. Cello was optional. I did make a cello. And when I was there, we, as a class, put a bass together. So I did have some bass making experience, which made me decide I did not want to continue in that vein. Not sure if
like a bigger project.
it felt like furniture making and wrestling.
Yeah.
I threw my back out for the first time in my life to make that bass, so that didn't enamor me with the situation. But
Well,
I know
it makes
plenty
it
of
sound, it
wonderful
makes
bass
bass making sound like a more dramatic and, fascinating project if it's like wrestling and and
makers.
whatever else you characterized it.
Well, there's some really good modern bass makers right now, and I think they probably were a bit smarter than us students were, trying to do everything by hand the same way we would make a violin. I know a lot of bass makers utilize technology and tools a little bit more effectively to save their bodies the wear and tear, because you can do that. That's one of the fascinating things about building violins, violas, cellos, basses, and repairing them. Is there's so many different ways to approach it, and as long as the end result is good, it doesn't quite matter exactly how you get there.
Mm-hmm. So I'll mention, you mentioned you have a 12-year-old who plays cello. My 7-year-old plays cello as well.
Awesome.
Well, that's fun. And yeah, I've always, it's funny that he's taken up the cello, because I always thought if I were to take up a different instrument, I would want to try the cello. It's a beautiful instrument. But yeah, I'm getting to know, more about stringed instruments. And so that's wonderful. I remember when he first got his cello, and I figured, I'm a piano tuner. I should know I could tune a cello, no problem. And I remember his teacher being like, you don't touch those pegs, okay? Don't touch those, And I was thinking, no, a piano tuner, and I can tune a
Mhm.
cello. No, there's those little adjusters down there by the fridge. That's what you do. um,
To a point, yeah.
to a
But
point,
when
yes. I mean, yeah, it was a little like I could handle it probably and not break anything, but it's interesting to just, just think how unique the skills are for each of these different domains, right?
Mhm. I think there's got to be some overlap. It's just learning how the friction pegs on the cellos work. And what I like to say about the violin, viola, and cello, or violin in particular, when people ask, like, why aren't you worried that 3D printing is going to take over? Aren't you thinking that, modern technology is going to surpass this and you're going to become obsolete? I view these instruments as somewhat like the shark or the alligator. They've evolved as far as they can because they've already kind of hit their peak existence. And there's been countless adjustments and patents and people with different ideas on how to improve the tone or the tuning.
Hmm.
But we keep coming back to the standard uh, good old friction pegs and Baroque kind of setup that they were originally. The main
Hmm.
difference now between Baroque instruments and modern instruments are the strings and the neck angle,
Hmm.
because most modern strings are some kind of composite of synthetic materials and metal and sometimes gut, whereas the old strings were all just gut and had much lower tension. So just the angle is different.
Hmm.
When you go to Baroque, since there's less tension, you can have a slightly thicker neck and a lower angle, and it can withstand that as opposed to the metal strings, which pull the necks down. And one of the common jobs I have to do, which we are doing a lot of right now in the shop, is the necks do get pulled down because wood's a natural material and
Hmm.
it's hygroscopic. It moves and breathes with the temperature and humidity, and over time that pressure does pull the neck down. So you have to remove the neck and put it back in. That's another reason these instruments last 2, 3, 4, 500 years, is because they were built to be taken apart and put back together again. Unlike guitars, which are a lot harder to put back together again, just because the binding kind of puts it all as a closed system, whereas the edges on the violin, viola, and cello, you can get in there and take the top and back off and disassemble it and fix things and put it all back together again. That's why we
Well,
still have the Strads and Amatis.
yeah, you make an interesting point about the old world craftsmanship, right? You're kind of saying
Mhm,
like the pegs and the traditional ways of making things kind of work. And you do see that. I mean, certainly there's things on the piano that have been improved over the years, but I think one of the reasons why some of that old world stuff tends to be so sturdy or time tested, whatever you want to say, is they really had to get it right, and they had to get it
mhm,
right for the long term. And these
mhm,
days we're so focused on things that are don't last that long, right? Like just a
mhm.
quick turnaround, and you can do a lot of prototyping and changing and adapting, and it makes us, I think, less inclined to create things that are of very like durable, high quality. Yeah. Um, we have a common connection. We just realized this, and I just
Mhm,
thought I'd bring this up. So there's a gentleman named Ken Stein.
mhm.
He's been I'm in Elmhurst, Illinois. I don't know if when you worked for him, so you worked for Ken. He's the
In the
violin.
Elmhurst location.
You worked right up there in that workshop.
Yes, I
That's
worked on
awesome.
the top floor. Yep.
That's wonderful. So for those, I may have mentioned Ken once or twice here before, but he's here in Elmhurst, Illinois, along with me. It was probably a year or so before I lived here and noticed it because it's like on a second level. It's kind of
Mhm,
hidden away there. And I said, oh, let me go in there. And, sure enough, there's this really cool violin shop. They don't make violins per se that much, but they're doing a lot of repairs and they've got a whole shop there. They do rentals and they do sales and things like that. Um, but yeah, he's a good guy and he's been at it for many decades. Um, so how did you end up there? So I guess you came to Chicago to get educated, and
yeah.
then you found out there was a shop in the suburbs and you just went out there and started writing. Did you come live in the suburbs too, or were you just commuting out?
When I first moved to Evanston, I moved to Evanston, Illinois in 2006, and I unintentionally lived in an intentional Christian community. Uh, I lived in a boarding house with the Reba Fellowship, which are Mennonites, and that was a really interesting introduction to the area. That group was lovely, a lovely group of people. But then my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, moved out, and we moved to Lakeview, so in the city of Chicago, and I
Sure.
commuted out to Skokie. But once I graduated, my husband's job took us to Milwaukee. So
Oh, wow.
I went to Milwaukee and just walked into the violin shops. The first one I went to was Corinthian violins because my teachers at the Chicago school knew Corinthia. And Corinthia is lovely. We're still really good friends. We chat on a regular basis. We just shared a hotel room together at the Violin Makers Society of America conference. But at that time, she wasn't looking for anyone to help her in the shop, and she recommended I go to her old boss, Steve Haas at Classical Strings. And he had worked for Bein & Fucci back in the 80s. And Bein & Fucci is a very large, well-known, well-respected Chicago shop. And they deal with, Strads, Guarneri's, really, really high-end stuff. So I learned my repair and restoration from Steve Haas. And then after a couple of years, our personalities did not work well together in a working environment. It was really rough. And the pay was terrible. So I went back to waiting tables, which had been my, backup job, and waited tables. And then eventually Corinthia did need someone to help her, but only part-time. So I kept waiting tables. I worked at Corinthia's part-time, and then started having my kids. And that was enough to keep me busy. But I always kept my tools sharp, and was always happy to do anything from, your most basic rental setups and cleaning to sometimes more involved restorations. And then my husband's job changed again, and we moved back to Evanston. And that's when I started working for Ken. A couple days a week, I would drive out to Elmhurst when I was pregnant with my daughter. And then my daughter came with me until she was about 1 year old, and then was ready to start walking, because I knew from having my son that a walking toddler in a violin shop is hazardous. You don't get any work done. Um, and then that's when I opened up my own kind of sole proprietorship out of our apartment, and I did contract work for a whole bunch of shops in the area. And I would still go back to Corinthian violins, once or twice a month. I'd take the hour-and-a-half drive up to Milwaukee and spend a whole Saturday there, so that Corey could take a day off, because she's there 6-7 days a week, because it's her and her husband. So I was always happy to go and make a few extra bucks and hang out in her lovely shop.
Let me,
So that's what I was doing.
nice. Yeah, I'll break in here again. I think
Mhm.
I would like to talk a little bit about just violins in general some more. I mean, let's
Of
talk
course.
about, I mean, I don't know how much you know about pianos, right? But we got our piano nerds in the audience.
Hmm.
And it would be interesting to just kind of see about ways we might compare and contrast,
Hmm.
the instruments, the building of them, the maintenance of them, and things like that. I'll put it in your plate first off. Like, is there anything that comes to mind when you think about the overlap, right, between the two instruments? You don't have to have anything. I can throw some topics on the table, but anything that you've realized, the two instruments have in common around these type of topics?
Absolutely. One of the main questions I get asked all the time is, what kind of wood is a violin made out of? Well, the top of a violin is spruce.
Hmm.
And sides and the back and the head are usually maple, sometimes they're other, but the top is almost always spruce. And the piano has a spruce soundboard.
Yes.
And also, when you look at a harp, spruce soundboard. When you look at
Hmm.
really good guitars, spruce top. I think there's something about spruce, with the light wood, but the straight grain with the harder winter grain and the softer summer grain. Something about that is very conducive to musical string vibrations. It just seems to bring out extra color and tone from the string. So I definitely think that is an overlap. Um, but
What
also, I mean, pianos and violins play together all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, there's clearly this overlap that we have, you know, I feel like there's something unique that crosses domains between not just the instruments, but this role, like your role and our role, right? Like
Hmm.
being a piano technician, right? Like somebody who has to come in and fix a piano, and you gotta understand how wood works, you gotta understand humidity, you gotta know how to deal with these materials, like we said, that are kind of old world materials,
Hmm.
leathers and these string materials and things like this.
Hmm.
And this sort of like workshop domain, which you kind of like, I'm trying to think about other instruments, right? Like the wind instruments feel a little bit different, right?
Hmm.
Primarily because they're not constructed so much of wood, and you're dealing with metal. You're mostly dealing with kind of clicky type of buttons and things like that. So it doesn't
Hmm.
have that, like you said, the spruce, the sort of like shape of the instrument only matters as to it being a container for the air, for example, whereas
Hmm.
for the shape of the instrument, it could be the wood, how it resonates, with the sound quality, things like that. Now, on a day-to-day basis these days, how much of what you do is kind of similar to this, repair and maintenance side of things versus building type of things?
Most of my time is repair and restoration.
Mhm.
I work on everything from, the humblest of rentals to the finest old Italian instruments and everything in between. I also do insurance evaluations. So I often get people coming in who are wondering, what they have, or they just need it insured. So I'm getting into, a bit of the identification and insurance evaluations and appraisals, which is a whole other different thing. Like one thing we definitely have in common is, in addition to the instruments, you also have to be able to deal with people and understand their connection to the instruments and what it means to them so that you can serve the instrument as well as the player just as effectively. I do still occasionally do new making. I have one violin of mine, which was the first instrument I've made since my children were born from beginning to end, which I just finished at the beginning of this year because I put on an exhibit, a Celebrating Women Luthiers exhibit. I got 48 women luthiers from around the world to send me their instruments, and I put on a big display and events that started here at Potter Violins in DC, and it traveled to New York and Boston, and it finished up at Sap Violins in Batavia, Illinois, so just outside of the Chicago area. So that was my new making was put in there because if I was going to put this thing together, I needed to have some of my own work exhibited. But the day-to-day stuff that I do, it's putting on new bridges, it's fixing pegs, it's gluing seams, it's like I said earlier, resetting necks because these instruments are made out of natural materials
Mhm.
that move and breathe with the humidity and temperature, and sometimes need a little bit of resetting. So.
Now, how do you feel about it as a career choice? Not to get too like personal, but I mean, we're in similar domains again. I almost think like the violin, and string instrument area has a little bit of a leg up on the piano industry in that your instruments are portable.
Yeah,
And the
that helps.
price, you can fetch the same price for a violin that's portable or even a bass that's primarily portable that you can for a piano that people, don't even know how to get rid of. It's so heavy they don't know what to do with it. But
Yeah.
you know, it's certainly different for that might also be an interesting topic for you to cover. What's it like if somebody wants to get in this domain these days? I'm sure when you
Hmm.
got into it, probably felt a little bit more kind of like secure and yeah, but tell us about what choosing a career in this domain. Yeah.
You've got to be very flexible, and don't get in it thinking you're going to make a ton of money. I'm I love my job. I can't imagine doing anything else. This is just something I've always wanted to do. So you kind of have to have that stubbornness and hard-headed passion that keeps you going because you're going to keep hitting your head against a wall. no matter what you do or where you go. And yeah, you have to enjoy the process of learning because it is constantly learning. And you can learn just as much from people who haven't been in the industry as long as you versus people who've been in the industry for decades, just because everyone approaches things a little bit differently. And if you come across someone whose thought process is in a way that is similar to yours and you haven't found a person like that yet, they can interpret things for you in a way that help you push yourself forward and make your work better. I would say I got into it because I always love working with my hands. I love crafts. I love doing repetitive things so that each time I can see, you know, an incremental improvement. And there is always room for improvement in repair and restoration and setup. And I think you have to enjoy working with musicians as well and being able to understand their needs, because every musician plays differently. You can give the same instrument to 5 different people and it'll sound different. And they'll all have different ideas of how they want it to sound or how they want it to feel in their hands or how they want it to respond, which, you know, it's fun and it's challenging because no job, even though it seems the same, no job is exactly the same. There's all these really tiny variables that you have to consider just based on what the player needs this instrument to do. You know, is it a child that's just starting out and you need the instrument to not fight the kid? Because so many cheap instruments that you can buy on Amazon. Please never buy a violin off of Amazon. It's a terrible idea. Don't do it, because there are things, all these details are not considered. The string heights are often too high so that it's literally cutting into the kid's hand as they're trying to play. The bow isn't made right so that even when you're trying to get sound out of it, it's fighting you instead of making it easier for you to learn. So that's like one end. And then you get the really, really high end, you know, I've worked with National Symphony Orchestra members, Nat Film members that, you know, they will go, well, you know, up the fifths up in the 6th position are a little bit off. And then you really have to get into the weeds with the tenths or hundredths of a millimeter trying to figure out exactly what they're talking about. And then how can you address it so that they feel more comfortable and they're getting the sound that they need.
Yeah.
So both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I'm curious. I forget what we planned for today. So forgive me, but like in terms of in anything interactive, like is there any instruments that you could show us or like play for us or anything? No, not to put you on the spot, but yeah, just what do we have at our I might even pull my son in here and if we got a cello or if you want to tell him about a cello or something, that could be fun.
I don't
You
have, I
don't.
can show you guys around the workshop though.
Yeah,
I
show us
am
around the
not a
workshop.
player. I'm not a player, but let's see if I can turn my camera around. Come on. And this is on Zoom. Come on.
You did that there for a second. Yeah, you were doing
Oh, I
it.
did? Okay.
That's
I
it.
was doing it.
Now you're back.
There we go. Okay. So right now I'm in Dalton Potter's office. He's the
Uh-huh.
owner of Potter Violins, but we have a second location in
Yeah,
Gaithersburg. So that's where he spends most of his time.
great.
But this is just, yeah, a repository of all his stuff. I think the head of our workshop, Chris Jacoby, will be taking this space over soon enough. But through this door is the workshop. And I will say we have one of the larger shops because we got about 8 full-time luthiers. And this
Yeah.
location that we're in is a mansion that used to be a dinner theater. And it was then converted into our workshop. And our workshop space here used to be the old kitchen. Uh, so you can see how we have all our instruments set up. All of these are instruments that the shop owns that are waiting to be set up and put on the sales floor. And that's Alfred's bench, who's one of our awesome luthiers. These are all commercial made instruments. So they're all factory made for the most part, usually from China. And these are the more affordable instruments that we send up to the sales floor when they need them. This is a mishmash of projects. And this is my workbench.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, one of the fun projects I did, I varnished a purple violin. So that one was
Mm,
fun. Went a little
nice.
bit out of the box. And right now the heat has turned on, so you can see these strings are super slack because, as I said, the wood changes and moves with temperature and humidity changes. And once
Hmm.
things get dry, like ebony pegs in a maple peg box, since they're different densities, the pegs tend to let loose. So we're doing a lot of tuning for people who are saying their instruments are broken, and we're like, oh no, no, just the pegs went loose. That's fine. We can fix that for you.
Always a relief.
Yeah. These are consignment instruments. Then we got cellos. And over there is Hannah working on one of her project instruments. Richard is our cello specialist. And we have a lot of rental cellos over there. And that back wall is all rental instruments.
Hmm.
And looking back where I was, the other door on that side, you can see Jerry going into drawers. Those are our bow specialists. We have two people whose sole job is to work on bows, because that is a whole different animal than instruments. Um, and what wood finishes are used? Anything, we use a lot of stuff that's kind of shellac based. But we also use oil varnish as well. But for retouch, shellac is usually better because it dries faster. And this is one of our rental receiving rooms. So these are all of our rental violins, violas, and some cellos. Well, not all. We have a basement full of them as well. Um, I can bring you guys around to the front. This is our
Somebody had
front
also
desk.
asked, what adhesives do you use in violins?
Um, the main adhesives are hide glue. So
Hmm.
glue from rabbit bones or skin, or animal bones and skin, because it's hygroscopic, just like the wood. And you can open it very easily. That's another thing that makes these instruments so easy to repair, and why they last for so long is it's quite easy to release a hide glue seam. As opposed to something that had like wood glue. You know, occasionally we use wood glue, occasionally we use super glue, but it's for very specific applications and very specific spots where you aren't worrying about it falling apart, or you know in the future someone won't have to open it again to fix it. So
Hmm.
it's you have to be judicious about it. And there's been many a time where I've come across an instrument that I've had to repair, and someone used the wrong glue in the wrong spot, and it's just a shit ton of cursing, and it causes more damage than helps. So yeah, I glue mostly, and you have to heat it up too. I have a little like fondue pot. That's my glue pot that keeps the glue
Sure.
at a steady like 150
And
degrees.
when you say that word, it's hygroscopic with a G, Hyg.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And I feel like, and what exactly does that mean? It means that it changes some with temperature, or what does that mean
It,
again?
it like the wood, it changes the humidity. It moves with the humidity of the
It moves with
environment
the
that it's in.
humidity. Okay.
Yeah, it
Yes.
moves and changes with the environment. So,
And so actually question about that, just because curious.
mhm,
So I get that with the wood, and then you
mhm,
use that to describe the glue.
mhm.
Um, and but you're also heating the glue. Are
Yes,
you,
yes.
and so is it that, because I know the relative humidity changes with the temperature, is it that by
Mhm.
heating it, you're changing the humidity and that's the hygroscopic quality, or is there another quality that it changes with temperature? Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah, because
Yeah, well, it needs to be warm because otherwise it's like Jello. I mean, you
uh-huh.
can use Jello.
Okay. But that's not the description of the hygroscopic quality. The fact
Hygroscopic,
that you heat it, it's really more the humidity aspect.
yeah, it's more the humidity aspect,
Okay. Wow, look at
and
this
how it
place.
moves. Yeah, this is the main. Let's see. Oh, CA glue, you can, but if you put CA glue on the wood, then it won't take the pigments that you want, and you really want some of the pigments in the wood, and then. Uh, Usually it's best if you can get a really good ground color and then just put a few layers of clear varnish on top. that tends to look the best. You can do CA glue, but it would have a very different look. But if that's the look you're going for, why not?
So this whole building is dedicated to violins, huh? I mean,
Violins,
string instruments,
violists,
string instruments.
string instruments. Yeah, and this is our
Wow,
cello sales room.
very nice.
So yeah, if anyone's ever interested in looking, so yeah, it's pretty cool to work in an old mansion.
Yeah, I bet.
And
Yeah, it's a great place.
you can see got a lot of people coming and going. An outdoor porch, and then these are rooms for people to try out violins when they come. Like if you were to come and make an appointment to look at instruments, this is what we do. We ask for the size and the price point, and we lay out what we have on a table like this for you. And then you come in sometimes with the teacher, sometimes with a friend, sometimes by yourself, and you can play through them and find the ones that you like. And then if you have one or two that you're undecided on, you can take them out for a week and play them at home in different areas. And then you can come back and decide if that's the one you like and you want to buy it, or if you want to keep looking. And this is, I love this thing. These is how a violin is made. Lots of old German factories used to make these as a display. Yeah, please go ahead. And yes, you can see it's a Saturday. We're busy.
How many people are involved in the operation there? Seems like quite a few.
I think we got about, I think it's somewhere between around 20 employees. Not all full time, but yeah. So our library. And then I can show you guys is it open? It's open. Our safe. This is where we have our fun. So these are all violins. You can see they're arranged by price.
Okay.
So like the expensive ones up there. This is the vault.
This is where you keep your Bitcoin.
Yeah. These are real. These are tangible.
Assets.
These are tangible assets. And then our bows as well. So, and the ever important humidifier. So yeah.
Now I've been wanting to ask this question, so it's a good transition from that room. I'm curious what makes a good violin, right? What is it, or cello, or bass or whatever, but like and of course it's the quality of the materials, the quality of the craftsmanship and the adhesives as we were talking about things, but what are the specifics there? Yeah.
Name, who made it, provenance, as well, like who's played it, how much of a paper trail does it have? If it was, made by Strad and went through certain shops like the Hill Shop, which is a pretty famous old one, and has certificates all dating back, and it's only been played by the best players and repaired by the best repair people, then it will be top notch. It'll be worth a lot. And yeah, that's generally how it goes. Although there are some really nice instruments that the makers just aren't as well known. So I definitely believe that you can get some modern made instruments right now by modern makers who haven't made their name in the same way the old Italians have, but you can get just as much sound and use out of it for much less money. But it depends on what you're looking for as a player and what your priorities are. Does it mean something to you to have that old Italian name? And I will say there are, subtle sound differences. Like one of the types of instruments we work on and sell a lot of here are old French instruments. Well, this is a French instrument. So this one right here, this is a French, this one's a factory made instrument. And this one retails for what? 7,250. but this was probably made by maybe multiple people in France, in Mirecourt, probably. And the French instruments, just because of the style of making and the school of making there, have a sound where I find the E string to be very, very present and the G string to be less so and a bit weaker and growly. And that is a consistent thing with these instruments, whereas Italian instruments do tend to be, a little bit more around and full. But again, it really comes down to the player's taste. And if you're in sales, you got to play all of them and start understanding the quirks, so that when you talk with a player, you understand, oh, well, I think based on your playing and based on what you're saying you're looking for, you should try these instruments from these regions.
Mhm.
One of my personal favorite regions for a really good affordable instrument, and I've worked on thousands of them, are German made instruments. You can find really good old German. All the phone calls I get, I have my great grandparents' violin in the attic. They brought it from the old country. It says Stradivari inside. 99.9% of the time, they are German made.
Hmm.
Germany was really good. It was starting in the 1870s when Germany was unified. They had a whole region that's what they did. They made musical instruments, and they were really good at getting them out to the rest of Europe and the United States. And they were even in Sears catalogs and Montgomery Ward catalogs. So all the American fiddlers and all of our Americana music, that's fiddle music, that's German made violins. And they were made really, really well. And even though they don't command the price usually that
Mhm.
old Frenches or old Italians do, I think that they are undervalued and
Mhm. Hot tip.
underappreciated. Yeah. And in the Chicago area, there are plenty because, Sears
Mhm.
Roebuck was right there. So there's a ton.
Mhm.
And that's what I worked on a lot of at Ken's, was either the German stuff or more modern Chinese stuff, which can also be very, very good. The modern
So
Chinese instruments, they know what they're doing.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that the provenance plays a big role, and also
Hmm.
the caretaker of the instrument. I'm comparing
Hmm.
that a bit with the piano. I do think that
Hmm.
there's people that pay attention to that,
Hmm.
but it's usually um, not. It sounds like it's not as common that that is important, right? Like,
Hmm.
we even had, oh, this was Herbie Hancock's piano, and we got
Hmm.
this from Herbie Hancock, but it was less that that was part of the value of it, and more just like, okay, well, we that's cool.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yes, that's very interesting that that plays such a role. I can see the technicians who've cared for it. That
Hmm.
makes sense. And do
Hmm.
you think that the having the people who've played it before be a value determiner is just a proxy for the fact that they probably had good judgment and therefore it's a valuable instrument? Or is it more, you know, this touched their hands and now it's touching mine? Like, how do you think that actually pans out in terms of contributing to the value?
Well, I mean, when you look at Strad violins, they're named after the players that played them.
Hmm.
Guarneri's as well. The one that's coming to mind, another Chicago connection. Rachel Barton Pine plays a Del JC that I think is an ex-Maud Powell. And that's how they're identified, is by who owned them before. Like
Hmm.
it's how we in the industry refer to a lot of the famous instruments.
Hmm.
So that plays, I think it's
It's
when
very
you can
customized in
trace.
that way. It's not
Yeah.
just any person had it, but that's part of what it was, is it's the person, it was made for the person, or it had their sort of signature in the creation of it.
They didn't, it wasn't necessarily made for them, because if it
Hmm.
was a Strad made it for all the royalty, the
Hmm.
Medici's, the Storionis,
Hmm.
and it's whose hands it has been played through and which famous people
Hmm.
have been attached to it. I often get asked, have you seen the Red Violin, the movie, The Red Violin? It's overly romanticized. But the idea that, the instrument goes through and lives through multiple people it outlives the player and gets passed
Hmm.
on to the next one. And I
Yeah.
do believe that it's a kind of symbiotic relationship, because I know for a fact, especially making myself and dealing with new instruments, that there's when you first start an instrument and it's brand new and you're playing it in. It needs playing in. It needs to start realizing that it's a violin and no longer a tree. And sometimes they're great right off the bat, but the tone of the instrument can change based on who you give it to. I remember once Geoffrey Ovington sent me a violin of his when I was living in Chicago, because he had a client in Chicago who was interested in trying it. And this was a brand new violin, and Geoffrey had won tone awards, and his instrument sounded amazing. And when it got to me, I took it out of the case and I set it up and I played it. And my husband says, "Wow, that's amazing. It sounds really good. I hope the client likes it and buys it." And then I brought it to the client, and the client was more of an amateur player and playing songs that I had learned in high school and not playing them great.
Hmm.
And but she liked the instrument. I think she eventually bought one from Geoffrey, even though it wasn't that one. But when I brought it back home and I wanted to play it myself again, my husband remarked, like, "Is that the same violin? It
Mm.
sounds terrible. It sounds like it has a cold." I'm like, "Well,
Mm.
because it hasn't been played by a very good player, so it
Wow.
doesn't sound as good." So,
What do
yeah,
you think caused it? Do you think that's what's being affected, or do you just not know? Is it kind of just like a little mystery or something?
my personal theory is when you're playing the instrument, you are, you're making it vibrate
Hmm.
in different ways. And the quality of your playing, like, can you pull as much tone and color and sound out of the violin that's there, or are
Hmm.
you just struggling with the mechanics?
Hmm.
And when you are past the mechanics and you're actually going into the sound
Hmm.
and playing things out, it expands the color and the capabilities of the
Hmm.
instrument more. When people ask, what's the difference between a $500 violin and a $500,000 violin, the best analogy I can come up with is like with cars. When you're first starting to drive a car, a Toyota Corolla is great. It gets you where you need to go, but it's not fancy. You don't want to hand someone who's just starting a Ferrari, or a high-end race car, because they won't know what to do with it, and
Hmm.
it'll take them in directions that they aren't capable of handling. And a
Hmm.
really good, really fine violin, especially one that's been played in by top players and kept
Hmm.
by top repair people, has a lot more to it.
Hmm.
And not every player can fully get that out. But if you're handed an instrument that has been played in like that, it almost plays itself in some ways, because you don't have to work as hard, because someone else has already kind of dug those grooves into the instrument. And when you
Hmm.
go to hit that note or hit that, it's like, "Oh yeah, I know how to do this." And
Hmm.
it sings, and you don't have to push it. It just comes out of the instrument itself.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the by intuition about what you were saying, the part that most resonated when you said dug those grooves, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm,
like, even knowing, and you can correct me on this or not, but like, just even knowing how the thing is put together. Like I know
mm-hmm.
that the bridge, for example, can get misplaced, right? It's only being
Oh yeah,
held on basically by the tension of the strings, right?
correct,
So you
correct.
could get a little bit off center with that, and a
Mm-hmm,
great player might kind of like pull it back into shape almost by the way that they're
mm-hmm,
playing the strings, or
mm-hmm.
just even adjusting it themselves, I suppose. But
Yes.
um and then in addition to that, like the grooves, they're probably developing even minor grooves on the fretboard, right? Based on pressing in the same place
Mm-hmm.
at the same
Yeah.
time in kind of a good position or something like that. And then if you have somebody who's sort of pressing in the wrong place at the wrong
Mm-hmm,
time all the time, that's gonna make make a groove for the wrong thing, I suppose.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I never knew that. How about your own forays and endeavors in, making violins?
Mm-hmm.
I'm off the top of my head, forgive me, I don't know. Do you design your own instrument at that point, or do you just sort of go off the designs of the masters and you're just sort of replicating it? Like what is involved in terms of um, a creative input into the process of what should a violin be, right, as the maker, versus kind of like, here's how it should be, and I'm going to do a great job at it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it can be very personal, and the opinions of what is good and what isn't is different. I could come up with a bunch of opinions myself, and someone else can have a bunch of others. But I will say when I started, and the main starting point, especially in school and when you go out, is you base your outlines off of well-known or instruments that are proven to sound good. And you try to take your numbers from there. And some people do straight copying, where they try to get something where the grain matches and the figure matches, and they try to make the varnish match, and they try to make all the thicknesses match and absolutely everything match. And there's some people who do a really, really good job at that. For myself, that's not my strength. I take the general idea of the instrument. And the last one I made was a copy of Adele Jesu, and I just used a template that one of my friends had. But I have made my own templates where I would do a technical drawing, and this is how I was taught in school. I would do a technical drawing of the instrument and get all the measurements right in a 2D technical drawing form, and from there be able to get an inside mold template. And from there, you glue on blocks, and then you form the ribs around it. And then the top and the back are carved, and you pull the inside mold out so it's not super duper heavy. And so a lot of instruments, modern instruments, are based off of outlines from successful older instruments. However, people do make their own. And when I was in school, against the wishes of one of my teachers, I did make my own viola outline. And that first viola actually ended up sounding great. And then I made another one off of that outline, and I wasn't as happy with it. So it can, again, it's up to the maker. It's kind of choose your own adventure, and what risks do you feel like you're willing to take, or what interests you, and what do you want to, try to learn from by going one path as opposed to another.
Mm-hmm. And I forget again, sorry. Are you making violins these days? I know you said mostly you're doing the repairs, but are you making them as well these days?
I made one this year, one that was
Okay.
completed this year, violin, and I started another one back this summer, but I haven't touched it since like July or
Okay.
August. But I
And
would like to get back to it because I'm surrounded in my workshop. Everyone I work with is a maker as well. My boss, the workshop manager, Chris Jacoby, has made over 100 instruments, and he just finished a 5-string violin, which was really cool. He's making a cello right now where the scrolls of Foxhead. It looks awesome.
Oh, wow.
And then I have another coworker who has made a copy of a really nice old Guadagnini, and his copies of that Guadagnini are played by both the concert mistress of the NSO and the concert mistress of the National Philharmonic. So I keep making, but it's at a slower pace because I like sleep and my family.
And when you make an instrument, how does it how does it pan out here? Like, is it a Robyn Sullivan violin? Is it
Mhm.
like a Potter violin because you're working with them, or no? You've made the violin, and it's
I've
kind of
made it.
your name goes on it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think my other one's in the room next door, but yeah, it's got my name on the label. I did make it here. Most of the time it was off hours, come
Hmm.
in on weekends. One of the really fun, we're closed for the week of the 4th of July, and we had a bunch of our friends who are award-winning makers just show up for the week. And
Yeah.
we took over the workshop and drank beer and carried on and made instruments at our own pace. And it was a lot of fun. And Chris is setting up to do that again this coming summer, and I'm hoping I'm able to participate in that. If not that, something else. But I do get a bit more inspiration and drive when there's other people around me making at the same time. Because when I'm on my own and there's no external deadline or force, I'm more inclined to just walk off and wander off and do something else, like laundry. When I was working out of my own home shop, I'd always get pulled away by kit
Right.
stuff, because I have personally have a little bit of a harder time doing that as an extracurricular activity when I have so many other
Sure.
things to take care of.
And how many instruments are out there in circulation, that are Robyn Sullivan instruments? Is it just a handful?
It's a handful. Got a little
Okay.
over a dozen, little over a
Okay.
dozen.
So it's a rare commodity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. Um, well, wonderful. I know we basically been at it for an hour here. It really flew
Mhm.
by. It's a fascinating topic area. It's cool to connect with you and find our common connections. I actually texted Ken during the session. It's like, jump on the Zoom. Robyn Sullivan is here, but I don't think he got to see it in time. But I'll
I
let him
saw him
know.
last week.
Yeah, that's really fun. I'll give him a call. It's been a bit since I gave him a call. He's very political, and he like basically went off the rail, went off the grid. He's like, I have to focus on the election. Don't try, or we're not talking for a
Don't
while. Just
distract
focus on the
him.
election. I don't know exactly
That
what
sounds
he's
about
doing.
right.
Some sort of activism or something, but anyways. Um, Okay, well, before we roll out, and by the way, we'll end the session. Maybe you can jump on, you and I'll do a little
Mhm.
post wrap up. But before we roll out, if people want to find out more about what you're up to, where they go, any final thoughts, words of wisdom for the crowd here?
Yeah, if you want to find me, I'm most active on Instagram, R Sullivan Violins. I do my stories more regularly than the grid, but I'm also on Facebook, Robyn Sullivan Violins. You can find me there. Um, Also, if you're interested in the exhibit I just put on, you can look up Celebrating Women Luthiers 2024, and that'll bring you to the website where it's the list of all the women involved and where everything went.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'll walk us off here. We have reached the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's been a blast here with Robyn Sullivan and our local audience in Zoom today. As always, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters that live in your home. For those of you that joined us today by signing up for this session individually, make your life more convenient. Subscribe to Piano Tech Radio. It's just $16 a month. Get the recording of today's session in our member area, as well as automatic registration for each week's new session. Sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH. Don't forget about the podcast, pianotechradio.com, the blog on Substack, and all of our socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you very much to all our diligent fans who show up every week, and those out there in the audio universe on the podcast. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you.